Hello, everybody. I am going to talk about Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. I'm going to stop when I get through that part of the chapter because that is where our test um, that's where our test goes to. So I will, fill in the blanks, the rest of it in another video in the future. So we're going to get right into this. This is Whistler's Nocturne in Gold, in Black and Gold. He gave it two names. He called it the Nocturne in Black and Gold and the Falling Rocket. Um, a nocturne means a night scene, and you can see that this looks pretty different than anything else we've been looking at. Um, Whistler gives it a context, though. He calls it the falling rocket, which means, fireworks. So you can see all of this, trickling light as if they've just exploded and they're coming down. And you can barely make out if this is water here with a reflection here of this, whatever this is, and the smoke probably from the fireworks. And if these are, shadowy figures or something, nothing seems very finished. There's no edges to things. It's what we would call abstract, but this is, of course, before there was such a thing. Whistler's dipping his foot into modern art with this. And he displayed this. This was an exhibit, and he got scathing reviews. And one art critic, John Ruskin, who was a very famous art critic and wielded a lot of power, um, said that he had charged 200 guineas for flinging a pot of paint in the public's face. He sold the painting for 200 guineas. And when Ruskin wrote this and published it in the newspaper, Whistler actually sued him for slander. And so Ruskin asks him, how long did it take you to paint it? And he says, half a day. And the lawyer says, you're charging 200 guineas for a half day's work? And he says, no, I'm charging for the experience of a lifetime. And his point is, of course, that, this is a trained art. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean, it's not art. Just because you can't see the subject as clearly as you would like to, like at the salon or the academy. My experience has led to this. Sort of like the first time an artist has said, I can make art anything I want it to be. It is art if the artist says it's art, and this is the first time we have seen this. Um, and he coined the phrase "art for art's sake." And this is very modern. This is how we think about art, and of course, it was very radical at its own time. So Whistler, he won the trial. Art, so in a way, art went on trial. Is this art or isn't this art? And the conclusion is, anything can be art that the artist says is art. And Whistler wins the case. So, art is what he says it is. um, Unfortunately, he lost all of his money. He went bankrupt because of the trial, getting lawyers and whatnot. So he furthered the art in a way. He pushed the dial of art history, but he paid for it at his own cost. So, um, and this is a very, what we call modernism. And modernism is this idea that it's not about, um, trying to um, make something look like something. That art needs to call attention to itself as art, which is what Whistler was doing. So, like a painting should be a painting. It can't compete with a photograph. Obviously, this we're not going to forget that photography is around this time, and this artists are going to react to what are we going to do if a photograph can do our jobs. And so, this idea of modernism that you can call attention to the medium of painting, and we're going to see the Impressionists do that. And these are just some other Whistler paintings. He was highly influenced by these other things happening in Europe. Japanese prints were coming in, so we're going to see that with the Impressionists as well. And this is his portrait of Joe, his partner, and this is called Symphony in White. Claude Monet is the Impressionist we're going to look at. So Whistler, we can lump him in with the Impressionists. He's over in England doing his thing. And at the same time, he would have come to France probably and seen what they were doing. At the same time, in France, the Impressionists are experimenting with their painting styles. So Monet is sort of the father of impressionism. He coins the phrase, and he sort of starts this cafe culture where artists all get together and discuss, what should art look like. If we can't be a photograph anymore, we don't have to bother with that. What should art look like? He was an advocate for painting in the open air. That's plein air means, full air, open air, and big patches of color. We're going to see tiny little brush strokes and paint being led on the surface. But he also had this idea of optical veracity, meaning he was trying to capture light and atmosphere with his paints rather than sort of a photographic or very representational image of something. He was trying to capture the fleetingness of sight, how nothing stays static in your eye. So how the eye would actually see light and atmosphere. And we'll get to Renoir in a second, but he calls attention to, in this quote, the idea of paint at this time is also being manufactured and put in tubes, which means you can carry it around. It's portable. And this makes impressionism even more possible. Just some old tubes. Somebody kept these. Isn't that awesome? It used to be carried in this pig bladder for a while, and now we have during the Impressionists actual tubes being manufactured. So this makes it possible to go out and set up your easel, or as in this Manet painting, yes, the same Manet from the last chapter, who befriends the Impressionists and actually experiments with the style. You can see here he's painting very much like Renoir or Monet. He was friends with them. He's actually painting Monet painting in his boat. So Manet himself would have been painting outside, painting Monet in his boat. I don't name these people. They're just a coincidence that they have very similar French names, Monet and Manet. If it's easier to remember, the A comes before the O, maybe is a way to think of it. Um, and we'll get back to Manet, who really does sort of find kindred spirits in the Impressionists. So Claude Monet puts this painting, Impression Sunrise, into a show, and an art critic calls this in a review. This isn't an impression. This isn't a painting. This is an impression of a painting, which is an obvious slam, right? It's like somebody saying like you're an impression of something. Means you're an imposter. You're pretending to be that. Um, and Monet takes it upon himself to start calling himself an impressionist to sort of get the better of it or to own it in a way. And all of the impressionists called themselves impressionists. So this is one of the first art styles that we look at that shows artists um, knowing their style. Like we can talk about whatever, the Renaissance or Baroque, but they didn't call themselves that. That's art historians looking back and calling them that. The Impressionists actually called themselves the Impressionists, and they had, a goal in mind. They had a common thing in mind. And one of these is to capture the momentary sensations of light and color on canvas. And you can see this idea of modernism, this idea of a painting should be a painting, calling attention to the medium itself. And we see that it's a seascape. We see that it's a sunrise. We see that these are boats, but are they? They're really just slashes of paint. And he even, you can see every brushstroke. He leaves paint kind of sitting on the surface. He doesn't blend it in to make it look representational. He's calling attention to the medium itself. So he's giving a lot less information in Impressionism. Um, so this is just a quote from the book. So I couldn't very he put impression on it because it doesn't look like it. And how could he expect somebody to believe it's a place because he is just trying to capture light and atmosphere at the expense of clear representation? So this is his quote. This isn't just art historians looking at what he's doing and saying this is what's new. This is exactly what he meant it to be. He's also very influential as far as getting shows for the Impressionists. Remember the Salon de Refusé that happened under Louis XV, where Manet had shown. The Impressionists, we should note, are mostly independent, wealthy people without having an art career. They are what are called flâneurs. They are people who hang about. They don't have jobs, occupations. These are people who can afford not to sell their art. They can also afford to put on their own shows, and we're going to see, uh, you know, that. Um, that's all stuff I already said. And just to show you the scale, so this is, a large Manet, like a history size painting. And this is what would have been, the goal for a lot of artists. The Impressionists make much smaller, intimate scenes where you can sort of have a one on one relationship with them rather than this overwhelming, grandiose sort of experience. Um, they don't aspire to be history paintings or to get, hung high up on the wall at the salon. They, aspire to create, small fragments of what you would see. And Monet loved to study light at different times of day. He went to London and painted the London Tower. He has a whole series about this of all different times of day. This is his woman with parasol, so he's painting outside. This is a little bit more representational than, say, Impression Sunrise, but we can still see his trademark, tiny little brushstrokes, light, atmosphere. And this is the patchy color thing that he wrote about. Um, we see these giant, big areas of sort of just paint with some, paint sort of brush through it, real alla prima, all at once. Like if you kind of squint, it looks like a puzzle pieces. Everything's sort of just fitting together in big flat shapes. Monet liked to challenge himself. He thought, okay, light and atmosphere. Well, this is the age that people are starting to travel more and more by the steam engine. And he went down to the train station and painted, trying to capture not just the light and atmosphere, but this, sensation of smoke as well. He painted the Rouen Cathedral many, many times, and he tried to label them like the weather conditions. And this is just so these are all one. This is not pop art. It's just displayed like pop art. All different times of day and in different atmospheres. So he gets different color palettes, and so he's out there every day painting. Different times of day, different weather conditions. He did this for these haystacks out in the country as well. So it's almost like a scientific study of light and atmosphere on the same thing. He has property in the south of France, Giverny, which he creates these beautiful sort of lily ponds, a Japanese bridge, these beautiful like weeping willows. You can actually go see this in the south of France. It's a tourist attraction. It's all still like this. These are current photographs. But he made many, many paintings down there. He made this bridge painting about 5 times, and this is a close-up of that so you can see his style, right? He has these layers and layers and layers of color, and then he just lets the top part, the lily pads, which are on top of the water and moss and all that, he lets them sort of sit on top as if they're just big, blobs of paint. But what he's kind of catching on to is, even though up close it looks like an abstract painting, as a whole, when you look at it instantly, you get the information you need. your eye assembles it into the thing that it is. He has actually captured the optics without really capturing the details. And this is just a large, he did this whole, a whole bunch of roundish or curved panels. And this is in the museum down the street from the Louvre, um, that you can just go in and sit as if you're sitting at his in his gardens. So I mentioned Manet. Manet does, hook up with the Impressionists. He loves what they're doing. He's a revolutionary. He's the guy who painted Olympia. He's the guy who painted Déjeuner sur l'Herbe. He's very much into this idea of pushing art forward into modernism. That art can't stay static like the salon wants it to when the whole world has changed. I mean, Monet's painting the steam engine. This is, revolutionary things are happening in Europe at this time. So, Manet thinks that art should change as the Impressionists do as well. So he experiments with it. I just showed you the Monet painting that he did. His painting of Monet, I should say. And this is so during the same time period. This is a bar at La Folie Berge. And hopefully you can see there's this woman. She is, the bartender. She's standing behind the bar. There's the counter. And there's bottles here. And we can see when we look closely, there is a gold frame here that this whole thing here is a mirror. And then we see the reflection. We probably saw the reflection first, but you have to figure out what's what because he's making some kind of optical illusion. He's making spatial inconsistencies though. So you can see that, if this is her back, where's this guy? Like we're not standing where that guy is. We're standing in front of her and she's staring at us. Um, it doesn't seem to make any sense. And then we see this balcony here with all these, people at the bar watching the trapeze artists. They seem to be feet here. Um, so it's a very busy scene. It's not on plein air. It's Manet's version. You can see it has a little realism in it. Remember, he's in with the French realists. As a hardworking woman having a moment, whether she's, flirting or this guy's bothering her. Um, we don't know. So he's playing with this idea of optics in his own way. Other artists, Keobut, who's a wealthy man, he actually collects Impressionism. He's also into painting. He's a trained artist. He likes what the Impressionists are doing, but he doesn't make the break with the brush style or the paint style. But he does go out and paint on plein air and try to capture light and atmosphere. This is at the time that Napoleon III has ordered all of the streets in Paris to be widened. Uh, he's reacting to what has happened with all the streets being the barricades of the revolutionaries. He's trying to make it so this can't happen again, for safety, for his own safety, really. So this is a time, when the Impressionists are out painting, they're painting these new street scenes, this widened boulevards, and as you can see, many people go out strolling in the streets of Paris. It's other than light and atmosphere, the Impressionists who are wealthy are painting their people. They're painting like wealthy people out doing wealthy people stuff, except of course for Manet, who sticks with his realism and introduces Impressionism a little bit. Oh, sorry, this isn't supposed to be here. That's just as funny. So you can see this intersections of the street itself, but Keoba is putting in. We have a working woman here. These are people working here. An intersection. The boulevard is where you would see everybody, rich and poor, intersections of all Parisians together. Renoir was a very successful impressionist. He painted with Monet and the others, and eventually he kind of uh, goes back to more salon topics like nudes, um, as does Degas. Uh, it's funny about Impressionism because they were revolutionary at first, but within 10 years, they are the darlings of the salon, and everybody loves Impressionism. And at that point, Impressionists kind of get tired of it. So a lot of the Impressionists sort of, you know, experiment with other things as they go. Um, this is Renoir's famous dance at Le Moulin de Galette. You can just call it Moulin de Galette. And you can see, he's experimenting with this trickling light through the trees. These are wealthy people at a wealthy party having a grand old time. Um, we have the movement of the trees around here. We have everybody sort of in a circle. He's moving the work around visually, by like what we call the line of sight, where everybody looks. You want to look. That's humans looking at paintings. But he's also using this light to create all this sort of wonderful movement. Um, and I didn't crop this slide. I'm going to point this out, that the Impressionists. Um, are not trying to compete with the photograph. If anything, they're being highly influenced by photography. We can see that Renoir has made the decision to cut off parts of the people. We know that in a painting, you adjust the scale to fit everybody. This isn't an accident. There's no, um, you know, uh, photo bombing that this kid has just run in this. This is a purpose decision that we see the Impressionists saying, well, we've seen snapshots, why can't painting do that? If we're just calling attention to a painting as just paint, why does it have to be all posed? Why does everybody have to be static and stay in one place in the frame, the picture frame? And this is just another one of his boating parties. He'd like to show rich people having wonderful lives. That's a cute little dog there. And as I said, he eventually he keeps his choppy brushstroke, but he goes back to very academic topics. Um, for good or bad, I'm not going to judge him. This is Degas, another famous impressionist. He helped to um, push it forward, but he didn't show a lot. He was very wealthy as well, so he didn't really need to sell his work. He liked to go to the ballet. He liked to paint ballerinas practicing. He liked the horse races. He liked very active paintings. Um, so at this rehearsal, you can see that he's doing the same thing as Renoir. He's cutting off. I mean, this girl's just like half a face here. He's cutting people off, and it seems awkward. Like this stairway is really blocking most of the people. See some legs flying down here, coming down the stairs. Nobody's posing for him. This is like a snapshot. It's a moment, it's an instant moment. It's a quick impression of what he's seeing. So he's not bothering to sort of compose it. He's actually left all this negative space right here in the center, and everybody's kind of like around the edges of the painting. The other thing he's doing is he's tilting the picture plane so that the floor is way up here. And this we're going to notice because this is the being inspired by Japanese prints, which are coming into Europe at the time. This is his tub. You can see this is a very similar scene to a Japanese print that he would have seen. This weird angle here. I'm also going to point out that Degas used pastel, which is a type of chalk um, that you would use for um, usually an underpainting or an underdrawing, but he's using it here as a finished medium. And this is new. He's experimenting, same brush strokes or strokes of the pencil here, but a whole different medium. And that's just one that I really like. Mary Cassatt, also influenced by Japanese prints. Mary Cassatt is a wealthy American woman who moves to Paris and starts painting with the Impressionists. She becomes very good friends with Degas and Berthe Morisot. And you can see she's doing also this strange angle looking down, but the floor is tilted up. Mary Cassatt often painted women and children because that is her world. That is where she's allowed to go and paint. But she's not, I don't know, what's the word, fluff or light. People often see her work as like very domestic or not as good as maybe what the men were doing. She did have her moments of sort of questioning things in art. You see, this woman is watching the opera, but this guy is watching her. So she's calling attention to this idea of the male gaze. Who looks at who? Who is art for? Bertha Morisot is another female impressionist. This is her Summer's Day. Uh, and I always think Bertha Morisot was doing something even more than a lot. She was much more like Monet. She really did like to see the paint on the canvas. She really did leave her brushstrokes visible. And you can see that she has these big patches of color. This is like, five different brushstrokes to make a coat, one brushstroke to make a hat. This like everything's just so instant. You don't really, it's just big layers and globs of paint. And of course, she painted women and children too, because that's what you can get. This isn't in your book, but this is a great example. I mean, this little girl's like swimming in alla prima paint. We're not going to cover him, Lautrec, but if you're in graphic design, you should probably look him up. He is one of the first artists to make poster art or raise poster art to the level of fine art. So, graphic design as fine art. He's a very interesting character, too. All right, post-impressionism are four artists that we look at who are grouped together because they all did something experimental in art. They don't have a style like the Impressionists. They're not meeting. Van Gogh and Gauguin will meet, but they're not a group of people together. They're just the people who were working after post-impressionism individually, but at the same time. And each of them, because of their newness, helps to usher in the age of modern art. So we start with Seurat. This is his Sunday at La Grande Jatte. And you can see he's using dots instead of little brush strokes. He does have a little bit of impressionism going on here. But all these little dots, it's like stipple, but all together. And this is giant canvas. This is in the Art Institute. Whoops, let me go back. This is called pointillism or divisionism, he called it. And what he thought was if you put one dot of color next to the next to another color, that the eye will blend it. Optical blending is what he called it. In class, I show the Khan Academy video on this. If you want to watch that, that has a lot of information on this. So pointillism is this idea of putting one color next to another and the eye will blend it. Optical blending. So if you put red next to blue, you would hope that the eye would see purple. Paul Cézanne is another impressionist we look at. Post-impressionist, excuse me. He knew the impressionists. He actually was in one of the first exhibits in Paris. He's a little bit older, and he moves to the south of France where he lives most of his life. This is his basket of apples. You can see he's tilting the picture plane like the impressionists. Big giant brush strokes. But he starts to paint this mountain outside of his house. And he starts to experiment with this idea of leaving shapes, basic shapes on the canvas. Of course, he knows what the Impressionists were doing with brushstrokes. So instead of tiny little brushstrokes, he is using, sort of like the side of his brush to make big flat brushstrokes and just leave them as shapes like triangles or cubes. He believed to get back to nature, and he painted this mountain, Mount Saint Victoire, from his window over and over again, many scenes over time. And he considered the whole thing a motif, as if the whole project was one big study, very similar to what Monet had been doing. And he broke his subjects into basic shapes. So instead of something fleeting, he wanted to make it something more solid, like a real shape rather than tiny little brush strokes. So let's go back and look at that. If you can see now, all these boxes and boxes, he's trying to solidify the form rather than make it sort of like fading away. And that's a quote from him. Everything in nature takes from the cylinder, the sphere, and the cone. If you take a drawing class, basic shape approach is the way to go. Usually I teach like the figure or the face. It's just a bunch of basic shapes put all together. And here you can see his another Mount Saint Victoire, and that's an actual picture of the mountain itself. And you can see where he kind of gets this. We see all these triangles and all this. And we're going to recall Cezanne when we get to Picasso, because Picasso would fall in love with all of this, including his large bathers. So he's trying his hand at academic topics here, like things the salon, but you can see the influence of the Impressionists, and then these big cubes and rectangles and things. The next post-impressionist is Vincent van Gogh, who has a very sad story, as you probably know a little bit about. Very early on, he becomes he wanted to be a pastor, and so the church gives him a church. And up north, he's a pastor, and this is where he has all these dark, very sort of sad paintings of the people who live there. These are the potato eaters. They are very poor up there, and Vincent van Gogh sort of internalizes all their problems and has a nervous breakdown. And the church says, this just isn't for you. We need somebody to help these people, not to be upset about their lives. So he goes to Paris, where his brother um, is an art dealer, and he owns like a gallery. So uh, this is the time of the Impressionists. Van Gogh says, "Oh, I want to be an Impressionist," and he starts painting. And he's not young then; he's in his late 20s, early 30s. Um, which is young, but at this time it's kind of late in the game to become something other than like what your career is already. So he starts painting, and he meets Gauguin in Paris, as a matter of fact, and he is not very successful. People thought he had something strange about his style. He added a little too much movement in his work. And he has another nervous breakdown. So his brother sends him to the south of France in Arles, where he lives. His brother puts him up. Theo supports him his whole life. You can see the tilted picture plane. We see the paint on top, but Van Gogh is doing something a little bit different. He's painting his own personal vision of the world, and that's sort of how he stands out, almost in an expressive way. If art can reflect somebody's life, it certainly does reflect Vincent's life, including everything he did and had in the south of France. This is his bedroom. This is his postman, who he painted more than once. Anybody he could get to paint, to sit for him in the town, he would paint. He painted the outside of the house, the inside of the house, the bar in the town, the everything he could paint. He painted. He painted many paintings a day. Sometimes he was a little bit manic. This is the night cafe, and he wrote in a letter to his brother this quote: "I've tried to express the terrible passions of humanity with red and green. Everywhere there is clash and contrast. Red and green are complementary colors." So he's using color in an expressive way. So that's something new in modern art, right? And he's also using line and movement in an expressive way. He's creating this very uh, kind of daunting, depressing feeling in this bar, which obviously these people are. And he painted many self portraits, including after he cut his own ear off, or part of his ear, after a fight with Gauguin. The next artist we'll look at, but we can see here, he's influenced by Japanese prints too. There's an actual Japanese print behind him there. His most famous painting is Starry Night, of course. This is a painting that is outside of the asylum where he was put after cutting his ear. He had a lot of mental health issues. And you can see the movement in the sky. Um, this is a cypress tree just waving there in the wind. We have the church here. Um, Van Gogh is Dutch, so he has this Protestant reminder of religion here. Um, this is always looked at as a very sort of serene painting, but really, it's a little. and knowing that he is in asylum at the time, we might read this a little bit differently. All these swirling things might be like anxiety or manic behavior. This is the wheat fields outside the asylum. These are sunflowers. He painted these many times. So when he's in the asylum and he paints the asylum itself, the inside of the asylum, till eventually he shoots himself. He shoots himself in the stomach and he dies 3 days later. He actually, his last painting, he shot himself in this wheat field. So Van Gogh is looked at as somebody who, used brushwork and color in an expressive way. He is a post-impressionist. He's also looked at as, a very modern artist. He wasn't liked at his own time. He actually died penniless. He only sold one painting. His brother Theo was his art dealer. People didn't like his style at all, and actually nobody liked his style until, the early 1900s, or actually the 1920s or 30s. He died in the 1880s, so it took a long time for the art world to discover the beauty of Van Gogh. Gauguin is the man who knew Van Gogh. Gauguin is a Frenchman who became a painter very late as well. And he quits his job as a stockbroker and um, leaves his wife and kids, actually. He moves up north and paints in Brittany. He paints some religious topics. This is his self-portrait. This is his painting up in Brittany. This is Vision After the Sermon. Um, and we see a religious scene here. We see Jacob wrestling the angel, and we have all these figures hanging around the outsides. Here's a picture of Gauguin himself. Um, and we see the tree here in the middle is just dividing everything. Everything's very flat. He's not really caring much about this whole Renaissance idea of creating, a 3D illusion. And to drive his point home, he uses this red ground. This is what Gauguin does that is so new. He's using color in a non-descriptive way, meaning it does not describe the thing that it is. It is red, and he's using it for a symbolic reason to create violence or passion. So we're going to remember this non-descriptive color. Not using color for what it is, but using color as you wish in an expressive way or a symbolic way. This is his yellow Christ, and I'm going to put this on our review sheet. Hint, hint. This